January 22nd, 2024. Margaret Chen arrived at her mother's apartment building to find moving trucks, armed security, and her elderly mother's wheelchair sitting abandoned in the rain. The building manager laughed and said, "Your kind doesn't belong here anymore," while affluent tenants filmed the humiliation for social media. What they didn't realize was that this CEO's mother wasn't just being evicted, she was being handed the perfect reason to buy the entire building and rewrite every single one of their leases. When does protecting your family become the ultimate business decision? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret Chen's Tesla skidded to a stop outside Grandview Towers at 9:47 a.m., her conference call with Tokyo investors still running through her Bluetooth earpiece. She'd taken the emergency call from her mother's neighbor exactly 23 minutes ago. "I need to call you back," Margaret said, ending a 12 million negotiation mid-sentence. Rain hammered the windshield as she stepped out. Her mother's antique wheelchair sat overturned near the dumpster, one wheel still spinning slowly. Cardboard boxes lined the curb, already soaking through, photo albums, medical supplies, her father's war medals scattered across wet pavement. Building manager Derek Walsh stood under the entrance awning, arms crossed, smirking. His polo shirt stretched tight across his beer gut, clipboard clutched against his chest like a shield. "You can't just throw her things out like garbage." Margaret's voice cut through the rain as she ran toward the entrance. Derek stepped deliberately into her path, his boots leaving muddy prints on the marble entrance. "Already did, sweetheart. Eviction was legal and final. Your mama had plenty of warning." Through the lobby's glass doors, Margaret could see her mother, Dorothy Chen, 68 years old, barely 5 feet tall, sitting on the lobby floor. Her thin frame shook with sobs. 2 security guards stood over her like sentries. "She paid rent on time for 11 years, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "Every single month. Never late once. New ownership, new standards." Derek's grin widened. "Buildings going upscale. No more Section 8, no more charity cases taking up premium real estate." A crowd of residents gathered in the lobby behind the glass, phones out, recording. Margaret recognized some faces. People her mother had baked cookies for, had helped carry groceries, had watched their children. Not one stepped forward to help. "My mother doesn't receive Section 8, Margaret said carefully. "She pays market rate for my father's pension." "Whatever you say," Derek spat near Margaret's leather boots. "Point is, she's out. Building policy. Owner wants a certain demographic, you understand?" The last 2 words hung in the rain like poison. Security supervisor Jake Brennan emerged from the building, radio crackling. He was 6'4", former military, with the kind of presence that made people step aside automatically. "Problem here, Derek?" "Daughter showed up." Derek jerked his thumb toward Margaret. "Probably gonna make a scene like they always do." Jake studied Margaret with cold assessment, her designer coat, her Italian leather bag, her BMW key fob visible in her hand. His eyes lingered on her face, doing the math. "Ma'am, your mother violated multiple lease terms." "We have documentation." "What terms?" Margaret demanded. "Unauthorized occupants, excessive noise complaints, failure to maintain unit standards." Derek rattled off the list like he'd memorized it. "All documented over the past 90 days, Margaret's jaw tightened. "My mother lives alone. She's nearly deaf. She can't possibly cause noise complaints. And she keeps that apartment spotless. That's not what our records show." Jake pulled out his tablet, angling it away so Margaret couldn't see the screen. "Multiple violations. Property management has full legal authority to terminate tenancy." Through the glass, Dorothy struggled to stand, her arthritis making every movement visible agony. The security guard, his name tag read C. Morrison, didn't offer assistance. He just stood there, watching an elderly woman struggle like it was entertainment. "Let me see my mother," Margaret said. "Can't do that." Derek stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. "She's trespassing now." "So are you if you don't leave property immediately." "Trespassing. She lived here for over a decade." Lived, past tense. Derek's smile never reached his eyes. Now she's an unauthorized person on private property. Security will remove her within the hour if she doesn't leave voluntarily. A silver Lexus pulled up to the curb. Veronica Whitmore, the building's HOA president, emerged with a designer umbrella and even more designer judgment. "Derek, is this going to take long? I have a spa appointment." Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Just removing the last tenant who didn't make the cut. "Mrs. Whitmore," Veronica glanced at Dorothy through the glass, then at Margaret, her lip curling slightly. "How unfortunate. Though I suppose it's for the best. The building is upgrading its standards." Margaret pulled out her phone, fingers steady despite her rage. "I'm calling my attorney right now. This eviction is illegal." "Go ahead," Derek laughed. "But she's still leaving today. Sheriff's Department already approved the eviction. Paperwork's all in order." "Sheriff approval doesn't override tenant rights violations," Margaret said, already dialing. Her corporate attorney, Benjamin Park, answered on the first ring. "Ben, I need you to stop an illegal eviction in progress. Grandview Towers, downtown." "My mother," she rattled off the address while Derek and Jake exchanged amused glances. "Ooh, lawyer," Derek mocked. "Fancy, let me guess. One of those free legal aid places?" Margaret ignored him, listening to Ben's questions. Yes, her mother received proper notice. Yes, there was a hearing. No, Margaret hadn't known about any of it because her mother, proud, stubborn, terrified of being a burden, had hidden every letter, every notice, every court date. "The hearing was last week," Ben said, his voice tight with concern. "Judge ruled in the building's favor." "Margaret, this is going to be difficult to overturn quickly. How quickly can you file an emergency appeal?" 2, maybe 3 days minimum. "But that doesn't stop the current eviction order." Margaret's grip tightened on her phone. Through the lobby glass, she watched her mother's shoulders shake with silent crying. The crowd of residents had grown larger. Some were laughing. One man, she recognized him as Leonard Jacobson from 8B, was literally eating popcorn while watching the show. "I'll handle it," Margaret said. Ending the call, she turned to Jake. "I'm taking my mother home with me right now. Her belongings stay here until my lawyer files the appeal." "Nope," Derek stepped forward. "All her junk goes to the curb." Building policy. Once you're evicted, everything gets cleared within 4 hours. That's her medication in those boxes. Her insulin. Should have thought about that before violating lease terms. Margaret's business mind kicked into high gear, calculating angles, leverage points, pressure vectors. She'd built a 200 million tech company from nothing. She'd negotiated with venture capitalists who ate people like Derek for breakfast. But right now, none of that mattered. Because the law was technically on their side, and her mother was sitting on a lobby floor, crying. "Excuse me," Margaret called to the crowd behind the glass. "Does anyone know my mother?" "Dorothy Chen? She's lived here since 2013. Several people looked away. Others suddenly found their phones fascinating. One woman, Sarah Fitzgerald, Margaret remembered her from building barbecues, met her eyes for a brief second. Something like shame flickered across her face. Then she turned and walked away. "Please," Margaret raised her voice. "Someone must know she's a good tenant. She's never caused problems." Veronica Whitmore sighed dramatically. "Darling, this is very awkward, but your mother wasn't exactly compatible with our community standards. There were incidents." "What incidents?" "Cooking smells." Veronica wrinkled her nose. "Very strong ethnic cooking. Multiple residents complained about hallway odors." Margaret stared at her. "You're evicting her for cooking?" "Among other things. The point is, the building is transitioning to a more exclusive clientele." "I'm sure you understand." Leonard Jacobson, still eating his popcorn, finally spoke up. "Look, nobody's saying anything racist here. It's just about property values. We have standards," the word standards again. Margaret was beginning to hate that word. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside the lobby, Dorothy finally managed to stand, leaning heavily against the wall. The security guard, Morrison, checked his watch impatiently, radio in hand. Margaret made one final attempt. "Jake, I know you're following orders, but you're watching an elderly woman with arthritis being thrown out in the rain. Is this really the job you signed up for?" Something flickered in Jake's eyes. For half a second, Margaret thought she'd reached him. Then Derek clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't let her guilt trip you, buddy. We're just doing our jobs. Protecting property values for the people who actually matter." Jake's expression hardened back into professional indifference. "Ma'am, you need to leave the property now, or I'll have to call the police for trespassing." The rain fell harder. Dorothy's wheelchair lay on its side near the dumpster, one wheel finally stopping its spin, and Margaret Chen, CEO of Tech Vision Solutions, Forbes 40 Under 40, MIT graduate, realized that sometimes all the money and power in the world couldn't stop cruelty dressed up as policy. But what none of them knew, not Derek, not Jake, not Veronica, not the crowd of residents recording this humiliation for their social media, was that Margaret had been looking for an investment property in this neighborhood for 6 months, and Grandview Towers had just moved to the very top of her acquisition list. A black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to Grandview Towers, splashing through puddles with deliberate aggression. The personalized license plate read, "Prop King." Russell Hendricks emerged, all 6'2" of him, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His silver cufflinks caught the grey morning light as he adjusted his Rolex. "What's the holdup?" His voice boomed across the entrance. "Derek, I thought we cleared this unit an hour ago." "Working on it." Mr. Hendricks' daughter showed up, making threats. Russell was the regional property manager for Apex Holdings, the investment firm that had purchased Grandview Towers 8 months ago. Margaret recognized the company name immediately. They specialized in portfolio optimization, which was corporate speak for buying affordable buildings and pricing out long-time tenants. "Ma'am," Russell approached with practiced corporate charm. Hand extended. Russell Hendricks, regional director. "I understand your mother's situation is difficult, but business is business." Margaret didn't shake his hand. "Business doesn't include illegal discrimination." Russell's smile never wavered. "Strong accusation. I hope you have evidence to back that up, because our legal team is very thorough with defamation cases. The threat was clear and calculated. Your company purchased this building in May," Margaret said. "Since then, you've evicted 17 long-time tenants. I did my research on the drive over. 14 of those 17 were people of color or immigrants. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." Russell's expression hardened. "That's cherry-picked data. We evict based on lease violations, nothing more. If certain demographics happen to have more violations, perhaps that speaks to behavioral patterns rather than our policies." Behind them, more residents gathered. Margaret noticed they were all white, all affluent, all filming with the latest smartphones. "Mom!" A voice cut through the tension. Dorothy had managed to reach the lobby doors, pressing her palms against the glass. Her voice was muffled but desperate. "Please, I just need my medicine. My blood pressure pills are in the blue box," Derek laughed. "Should have packed better, Grandma." Margaret moved toward the door. Jake Brennan blocked her path immediately, hand resting on his belt near his pepper spray. "Step back, Ma'am. I'm getting my mother's medication." "That's not negotiable. Everything on that curb is abandoned property," Russell interjected smoothly. "If you want to retrieve items, you're welcome to sort through it, but nobody enters the building. Those are my orders." Margaret pulled out her phone again, this time opening her email. Her fingers flew across the screen, while Derek and Russell exchanged confused glances. "Who's she calling now?" Derek muttered. "Probably some activist group," Veronica Whitmore said from behind her umbrella. "They always try to make everything about race." Margaret sent 3 emails simultaneously, one to her publicist, one to her company's PR team, and one to an investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune who owed her a favor, a silver Mercedes with government plates pulled up. City Councilman Howard Sterling stepped out, immediately shaking hands with Russell like they were old golf buddies. "Russell, good to see you. Got your message about potential disruption. Appreciate you coming, Howard." "Just a standard eviction. But the daughter's threatening legal action. Howard turned to Margaret with the patronizing smile politicians reserve for constituents they don't actually care about. Miss, I understand emotions are high, but Mr. Hendricks's company has been an excellent partner in our downtown revitalization efforts. They're bringing significant investment to this neighborhood by displacing the people who've lived here for decades. Margaret's voice was ice. Progress requires change, Howard said smoothly. Sometimes that's uncomfortable, but it's necessary for the greater good. Property values in this area have increased 23% since Apex Holdings took over. That benefits everyone, except the people being evicted. I'm sure your mother will find suitable accommodation elsewhere. There are several assisted living facilities. My mother doesn't need assisted living. She needs her home. Howard's smile tightened. Miss, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Don't make this a circus. These situations rarely end well for the people who resist progress. Another threat, this one from an elected official. Inside the lobby, Dorothy had slid back down to the floor, her face pale. Margaret's medical training from years of watching her father's health decline kicked in. Her mother's blood pressure was spiking. Without her medication, she could stroke out. I'm going in to get her pills, Margaret announced, moving toward the door. Jake stepped directly in front of her, hand now on his radio. Final warning, ma'am. Any attempt to enter the building will result in arrest for trespassing. Arrest me then. My mother needs her medication. Russell raised his hand. Let's not escalate unnecessarily. Derek, have someone bring the blue box to the entrance. We're not monsters here. Derek disappeared inside while Margaret and Jake stood in a tense standoff. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, but the damage was done. Cardboard boxes were disintegrating, their contents ruined. When Derek returned, he was empty-handed. Can't find any blue box. Must have gotten mixed with the trash already. Dumpster truck came 20 minutes ago. Margaret's control finally cracked. You're lying. That medication was prescribed 3 days ago. The bottle is nearly full. Not my problem, Derek shrugged. Should have been more organized during the move-out. A young woman emerged from the growing crowd, college-aged. Phone held high, clearly live-streaming. This is absolutely insane, she narrated to her camera. They literally just admitted to throwing away this elderly woman's medication. I've been watching for 20 minutes, and nobody will help her. Emily, get back inside, Veronica snapped. This isn't your concern. I'm not deleting this. Mrs. Whitmore, people need to see what's happening. Emily Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was a social work student at Northwestern. Her TikTok stream already had 847 viewers and was climbing fast. Comments flooded her screen. This is America 2024. Someone call the news. That building manager needs to be fired. Elder abuse on camera. Margaret noticed other phones appeared in windows above. More residents recording. Though whether out of concern or entertainment was unclear, Russell noticed too. His corporate smile slipped. Miss, perhaps we should discuss this more privately. Bad optics benefit no one. Bad optics. Margaret's laugh was sharp. You mean the optics of throwing a 68-year-old woman into the street? We're following legal protocol. You're following the letter of law while violating its spirit. There's a difference. A news van turned onto the street. Channel 7, local morning broadcast. Emily's live stream had caught someone's attention faster than Margaret expected. Reporter Amanda Walsh jumped out with her cameraman, immediately assessing the scene with practiced efficiency. She'd won 3 regional Emmys for investigative journalism on housing discrimination. Russell Hendricks? Amanda called out, microphone already leave. Amanda Walsh, Channel 7 News. Can you comment on allegations that Apex Holdings is systematically evicting minority tenants from Grandview Towers? Russell's face went carefully blank. No comment at this time. This is a private property matter, but you're on a public sidewalk, which makes it public interest. Amanda turned to Margaret. Ma'am, are you the family of the tenant being evicted? Before Margaret could answer, Derek stepped between them. Interview's over. Everyone not living here needs to leave property immediately. We're on the public sidewalk, Amanda repeated. First Amendment applies here, sir. Emily's viewer count hit 2,341. then 2856. Screenshots were already spreading across Twitter. Instagram, Reddit. Grandview eviction started trending locally within minutes. More residents emerged from Grandview towers. Drawn by the commotion and news camera, they formed a loose semicircle around the entrance, phones out, recording from multiple angles. Margaret noticed the demographics clearly: overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly affluent, all wearing the casual, expensive clothes of people who'd never worried about eviction. "Finally cleaning up the building," one man said loudly enough to be heard. "Property values have been dragging because of tenants who don't maintain standards." "I heard she was hoarding," a woman in Lululemon added. "Multiple complaints about the smell." "That's a lie." Margaret spun toward her. "My mother keeps her apartment immaculate. I visit every Sunday." "Well, something must have been wrong for them to evict her," another resident chimed in. "They don't just throw people out for no reason." The narrative was forming in real time, shaped by assumption and prejudice. Dorothy Chen wasn't an elderly woman losing her home. She was a problem tenant who'd finally faced consequences. Veronica Whitmore seized the moment. "I think we all need to remember that building management makes difficult decisions to protect all residents. Sometimes individual hardship is necessary for community well-being." Several residents nodded in agreement. One started clapping and others joined in, actually applauding the eviction of a 68-year-old woman. Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger anymore, something more dangerous. Calculation. Inside the lobby, Dorothy had curled into herself, hands covering her face. Security guard Morrison stood over her, scrolling through his phone, completely indifferent to her suffering. Emily's live stream captured everything: the applauding residents, Dorothy on the floor, the boxes disintegrating in the rain, Margaret standing alone against the crowd. "This is disgusting," Emily narrated. "These people are celebrating someone's trauma. Where is humanity?" Comments exploded. "Rich people are sociopaths. I'm sharing this everywhere. Someone ID these residents. That building deserves to be exposed." Amanda Walsh was interviewing residents now, getting sound bites that would play on evening news. Each interview revealed more callousness, more casual cruelty, dressed as concern for property values. "We have standards here," Leonard Jacobson told the camera, still holding his popcorn. "Not everyone fits Grandview's vision for the future." Howard Sterling pulled Russell aside, their conversation urgent and low. Margaret could read their body language. The councilman was worried about political fallout, advising quick resolution before the story grew bigger. Jake Brennan's radio crackled. "Sir, we have more media incoming. CNN affiliate and 2 online news outlets requesting access." "Damn it," Russell muttered. Then louder, "Everyone inside the building now. Lockdown protocol until media clears." Residents began filtering back inside, disappointed their entertainment was ending. Some lingered at windows, continuing to film from above. Russell approached Margaret one final time. "Miss Chen, I'll make you an offer. We'll give your mother 60 days to find new housing. We'll even waive the remaining lease penalties. But this ends now. No lawsuits, no media circus, no social media campaigns." "That's very generous," Margaret said quietly. 60 whole days to find affordable housing in Chicago's tightest rental market in 20 years. It's more than we're legally required to offer. What you're legally required to offer is dignity. You've failed at that." Russell's corporate mask slipped completely. "You want to play hardball? Fine. My company has lawyers on retainer that'll bury you in motions and discovery for years. You'll spend hundreds of thousands fighting this and lose. That's the reality. Is that what you tell all the families you displace? That resistance is futile? I tell them the truth. Power wins. Always has, always will." Behind them, a sheriff's deputy finally arrived, looking uncomfortable with the media presence and growing crowd. He approached Jake Brennan, and they conferred quietly. Emily's live stream hit 5,000 viewers. National Twitter accounts were picking up the story. Hashtags multiplied. Grandview eviction, Shoes housing justice, Shoes elder abuse. Inside the lobby, Dorothy Chen tried once more to stand. This time her legs buckled completely. She collapsed against the marble floor, and Margaret heard the thud even through the glass doors. "Mom!" Margaret lunged for the entrance. Jake grabbed her arm. "You're not going in there." She just collapsed. "She needs medical attention." "Then we'll call an ambulance." "But you're not entering the building." Morrison finally moved, checking Dorothy's pulse with clinical detachment. He spoke into his radio. "May need medical. Elderly woman, conscious but weak." The ambulance sirens started wailing in the distance, growing closer, and Margaret Chen realized that sometimes the law protects the wrong people. Sometimes authority serves cruelty instead of justice. Sometimes the only way to fight a rigged system is to change who controls it. Russell Hendricks had said power wins. He had no idea how right he was about to be proven. Just not in the way he expected. The ambulance pulled up with lights flashing, but no siren. Paramedics rushed through the lobby doors that Jake finally unlocked. Margaret tried to follow. Jake's hand shot out, blocking her path with his forearm. "Family only gets access during medical emergency," Margaret said through clenched teeth. "We'll let the paramedics assess first," Russell interrupted smoothly. "If she needs transport, you can meet her at the hospital. Until then, you're still not authorized on property." Through the glass, Margaret watched paramedics check her mother's vitals. Dorothy was conscious but disoriented, her lips moving in what looked like apologies. Even while collapsing, she was sorry for causing trouble. That image, her proud, strong mother reduced to apologizing for being discarded, crystallized something in Margaret's chest. The lead paramedic emerged. "Blood pressure is 180 over 110. She's in hypertensive crisis. Says she hasn't had her medication in 8 hours. Her pills were in the boxes your people threw away," Margaret said directly to Derek. Derek shrugged. "Not our responsibility once items are removed from the unit." "We're transporting to Northwestern Memorial," the paramedic continued, shooting Derek a disgusted look. "Someone can ride with her." "I'm coming," Margaret said. Russell checked his expensive watch. "Actually, there's one more matter to address before anyone leaves." "Sheriff's deputy, you have the final eviction order?" Deputy Martinez, a middle-aged Hispanic woman who looked increasingly uncomfortable, pulled out folded papers. "Ma'am, I need to serve you these documents as your mother's representative." Margaret took the papers. "Formal eviction notice with personal liability clause. Any items remaining on property after 2 p.m. today become the building's disposal property. Any attempt to re-enter premises will be prosecuted as criminal trespass. Further, family members who interfere with legal eviction proceedings may face obstruction charges." She read the last part twice. "They were threatening to arrest her if she fought back." "You have 4 hours," Russell said. "Then everything left on that curb goes to the landfill, including anything valuable. Family heirlooms, documents, photos, all of it. Your choice." Derek grinned. "Better start sorting, sweetheart. Clock's ticking." The crowd of residents still watching from windows started dispersing, satisfied that the show was ending on schedule. Emily's live stream had 8,400 viewers. But what could viral outrage actually accomplish against legal authority? Margaret looked at the soggy boxes, her mother being loaded onto a gurney, the smug faces of men who'd turned cruelty into policy. 4 hours, she repeated quietly. "Glad you understand how this works," Russell said. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a building to run." He turned his back on her, dismissive, final, confident in his victory. That was his first mistake. Margaret pulled out her phone, not to make a call this time, but to open a specific app. Her fingers moved with precise purpose across the screen. "What's she doing?" Derek muttered to Jake. Margaret looked up, her expression shifted from grief to something harder, colder. "Tell me something, Mr. Hendricks. How much do you know about Apex Holdings' ownership structure?" Russell paused mid-step. "Excuse me?" "Simple question. Who owns Apex Holdings?" "That's proprietary corporate information," Russell said carefully. "Not relevant to your mother's eviction." "Humor me." Margaret's tone carried an edge that made several people look up. "Apex Holdings is a subsidiary of what parent company?" Russell's jaw tightened. "Meridian Capital Group, but again, not relevant." And Meridian Capital Group is a private equity fund with how many institutional investors? I'm not discussing confidential business structures with you. 47 institutional investors, Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken, including Tech Vision Solutions, which holds an 8.3% stake in Meridian. That makes us one of the top 5 voting shareholders. The words hung in the cold January air. Russell's face went carefully blank. Tech Vision Solutions? My company. Margaret's voice was conversational now, almost pleasant. I'm Margaret Chen, CEO and founder. Perhaps you've heard of us? We did $847 million in revenue last year. Forbes featured us in their Most Innovative Tech Companies issue. Derek's grin vanished. Jake Brennan's hand dropped from his radio. You're bluffing, Russell said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Margaret tapped her phone screen. This is my direct line to Lawrence Chen, no relation Chief Investment Officer at Meridian Capital. He reports to the board, which includes representation from all major stakeholders. Would you like me to call him? It's 10:47 a.m. He's definitely available. Now, wait a minute. Margaret was already dialing, putting the phone on speaker. It rang twice. Margaret! Lawrence's voice boomed through the speaker, friendly and warm. Wasn't expecting to hear from you until our quarterly review next month. What's going on? Larry, I need to ask you something about Apex Holdings. They're a Meridian subsidiary, correct? Yeah, one of our property management divisions. Why, they screwing something up? Russell's face had gone from blank to pale. I'm standing outside a building they manage, Grandview Towers in downtown Chicago. They just evicted my mother. Silence on the other end. Then, they did what? Evicted my 68-year-old mother. Threw her belongings in the rain. Destroyed her medication. She's currently being loaded into an ambulance with hypertensive crisis. Jesus Christ. Margaret, I had no idea. Hold on. The sound of typing came through the speaker. Pulling up the property file now. Grandview Towers, acquired 8 months ago. Occupancy optimization program. Holy shit, 17 evictions in 6 months? 14 of them are minorities or immigrants, Margaret added. More typing. Okay, this is bad. This is really bad. Who's the regional manager on site? Russell looked like he might be sick. Russell Hendricks, Margaret said, watching his face. He's standing right here. Would you like to speak with him? Put him on. Russell took the phone with a hand that trembled slightly. Larry, this is a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. You evicted a board member's mother? I didn't know who she was. Why the hell does that matter? Lawrence's voice cracked through the speaker like a whip. You shouldn't be evicting elderly people, period. What the hell kind of operation are you running? We've been following the optimization protocol you approved. Optimization doesn't mean throwing grandmothers in the street. Pull up your eviction records. Now. Russell fumbled with his tablet, hands shaking. Derek had backed away, suddenly very interested in something across the street. Jake Brennan removed his security cap, running his hand through his hair in the universal gesture of, I'm so screwed. 17 evictions, Lawrence continued, clearly reading from his own screen. Average tenant age 61, average tenancy duration 9.4 years. Russell, this isn't optimization, this is wholesale displacement of stable long-term tenants. What the hell were you thinking? Property values have increased 23% by pricing out the people who've lived there for a decade. That's not value creation, that's predatory profiteering. Did you even review the discrimination metrics? The legal team cleared all evictions. Legal and ethical aren't the same thing. Lawrence's frustration was palpable. Margaret, I am so sorry. This doesn't represent Meridian's values or Apex's intended mission. I appreciate that, Larry, Margaret said, taking her phone back. But apologies don't help my mother right now. Agreed. Here's what's happening immediately. Russell, you're suspended pending investigation. All evictions at Grandview Towers are halted effective immediately. Any tenants evicted in the past 6 months get first right of return at their original rental rates. Russell's face went from pale to ashen. Larry, you can't. I can and I am. Security, building management, all operations report directly to corporate until further notice. Margaret, I'm assigning you temporary oversight authority as shareholder representative. The paramedics were wheeling Dorothy toward the ambulance. She was conscious enough to see her daughter standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, watching the man who'd evicted her literally crumble. Emily's live stream exploded with comments. Plot twist. She's the CEO. They just messed with the wrong family. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Viewer count, 12,147. Climbing fast. Margaret ended the call and looked at the assembled group. Russell, Derek, Jake, Veronica, and the handful of residents still watching. Let me be very clear about what happens next, she said quietly. My mother gets her apartment back, fully restored, with all damages paid. Every item destroyed or damaged gets replaced at market value. Her medical bills, all of them, get paid by Apex Holdings. We can work something out, Russell started. I'm not finished. Margaret's voice carried steel. Every tenant evicted from this building in the past 6 months gets contacted today. They get offered their units back at original rates, or, if they've moved on, they receive relocation compensation of 3 months' rent, plus moving costs. That'll cost hundreds of thousands. I'm aware. Consider it the price of doing business ethically. Margaret turned to Derek. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the property once my mother is stable. Derek's face flushed red. You can't fire me. I was following orders. You threw an elderly woman's medication in the trash. You mocked her while she cried. You referred to her as your kind. Yes, I can fire you, and I just did. She turned to Jake. You have a choice. Stay and receive comprehensive bias training or resign. Either way, your conduct today gets documented in your permanent file. Jake nodded slowly. I'll stay, and I'll do better. See that you do. Margaret looked at Veronica Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, the HOA doesn't control individual apartment leases, but your comments today will be reviewed by the building's oversight committee. Ethnic cooking is not a valid complaint. Get used to diversity or find somewhere else to live. Veronica clutched her designer handbag. I have rights as a resident. So does everyone else. That's the point you keep missing. Deputy Martinez had been standing quietly through the entire exchange. Now she approached Margaret with something like respect. Ma'am, for what it's worth, I'm glad this got sorted out. I've had to serve a lot of eviction notices. Most of them don't end with justice. Most of them should, Margaret replied. The ambulance doors closed with Dorothy inside. The lead paramedic turned to Margaret. She's stable enough for transport. You coming? Right behind you. Margaret looked back at Grandview Towers, the building that had tried to erase her mother, that had counted on powerlessness and lack of resources to avoid consequences. Russell stood near his Cadillac, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his lawyer. Derek had disappeared into the building, likely clearing out his office. Jake Brennan was gathering the scattered, soaked boxes from the curb, finally showing basic human decency. Emily ended her live stream with a final comment. Sometimes justice happens. Not often enough, but sometimes. Remember this story. When people tell you fighting back is pointless, Amanda Walsh from Channel 7 approached with her microphone. Ms. Chen, can you comment on what just happened? My mother is going to the hospital, Margaret said. When she's stable, we'll talk. Until then, I have work to do. She climbed into a Tesla, following the ambulance toward Northwestern Memorial. Behind her, Grandview Towers stood silent, a building full of people who'd just learned that cruelty has consequences, and that sometimes the person you're stepping on has the power to change everything. But Margaret Chen wasn't done. Not even close. The eviction had been the opening move. What came next would be the complete transformation of how business got done, not just at Grandview Towers, but across every property Meridian Capital controlled. Russell, Hendricks had said power wins. He was about to learn that power, wielded with compassion, beats power, wielded with cruelty. Every single time. 3 days later, Northwestern Memorial Hospital released Dorothy Chen with strict instructions for medication management and stress reduction. Margaret converted the guest suite in her Lincoln Park penthouse into a recovery room, complete with medical monitoring equipment and 24-hour nursing care. But before her mother could rest, Margaret had work to do. The conference room at TechVision Solutions headquarters occupied the entire 42nd floor with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Margaret had specifically chosen this location for the emergency meeting, neutral territory where she controlled every variable. At 2 p.m. sharp, they began arriving. Russell Hendricks entered first, no longer wearing his expensive suit. Today he wore business casual, his swagger replaced by visible anxiety. His corporate lawyer, Jennifer Morrison, accompanied him, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her career defending property management companies. Lawrence Chen came next, Meridian Capital's chief investment officer, carrying 3 bankers' boxes of documentation. His usual friendly demeanor had been replaced by cold, professional assessment. Building manager Derek Walsh had been fired, but the other staff members were required to attend. Jake Brennan arrived in his security uniform, freshly pressed. Sandra Pierce, the Grandview Towers leasing manager who'd processed the eviction paperwork, kept her eyes down as she entered. Veronica Whitmore arrived with her own attorney, clearly prepared for battle. HOA board members Timothy Grayson and Michelle Porter flanked her, both looking deeply uncomfortable. City Councilman Howard Sterling came last, no longer friendly. His political instincts had sensed danger the moment Emily's livestream went viral. 300,000 views, picked up by national news outlets, shared by housing advocacy groups across the country. Margaret stood at the head of the conference table, her laptop connected to the room's 85-inch display screen. Her assistant, David Park, sat ready to take minutes that would become legal documentation. "Thank you for coming," Margaret began, her voice calm and measured. "We're here to comprehensively review the events of January 22nd and establish protocols to ensure they never happen again." "Ms. Chen," Jennifer Morrison interrupted, "my client is here in good faith, but I need to clarify that Apex Holdings disputes any wrongdoing. Your client evicted my 68-year-old mother and destroyed her medication," Margaret said flatly. 14 other longtime tenants suffered similar treatment. "The wrongdoing is extensively documented. We're not here to debate whether it happened. We're here to address consequences and corrections." She clicked her laptop. "The screen is filled with data. Grandview Towers acquisition analysis," Margaret announced. Apex Holdings purchased the property on May 15, 2023 for $8.2 million. The building contained 64 residential units with 91% occupancy and average tenant tenure of 8.7 years. Numbers appeared on screen, color-coded by demographics. Within 8 months, you initiated 17 evictions. Let's examine the demographic breakdown. A chart materialized. 87% of evicted tenants were people of color. 76% were over age 55. 94% had lived in the building for more than 5 years. Average income, $34,000 annually. By contrast, new tenants approved during the same period show dramatically different demographics. Another chart appeared. 89% white. Average age 32. Average income $87,000 annually. Russell shifted uncomfortably. Market conditions changed. We adjusted tenant mix to reflect current neighborhood economics. You systematically displaced vulnerable populations to maximize profit, Margaret corrected. Let's review specific cases. She clicked through files. Each evicted tenant's story laid out in brutal detail. Mrs. Okonkwo, age 71, evicted for excessive cooking odors. Reality, she prepared traditional Nigerian meals. No actual lease violation. Mr. Ramirez, age 63, evicted for unauthorized occupants. Reality, his adult son stayed with him while recovering from surgery. Temporary, documented, not prohibited by lease. The Patterson family, evicted for excessive noise. Reality, they had 3 children under age 10. Normal family activity, not lease violation. Each eviction used technically legal justifications to mask discriminatory intent, Margaret continued. Your attorneys ensured the paperwork would survive cursory legal review. But pattern analysis reveals systematic targeting. Jennifer Morrison's pen moved rapidly across her legal pad. This was worse than she'd anticipated. Financial impact on displaced tenants. Margaret brought up another spreadsheet. Average moving costs, $4,300. Average rent increase in new locations, 47%. 2 families became homeless. 1 elderly tenant died from a stress-induced heart attack 6 weeks after eviction. The room went silent. Mr. Sterling, Margaret turned to the councilman. You arrived at the eviction scene and explicitly endorsed Apex Holdings' actions. You cited revitalization efforts and progress requiring change. Would you like to explain that position to the media waiting downstairs? Howard Sterling's face went carefully neutral. I was responding to a constituent complaint. I didn't have full information. You had enough information to threaten me with consequences if I made it a circus. Your exact words. Margaret played audio from Emily's live stream. Howard's voice filled the conference room, dripping with condescension and implicit threat. He had no response. Lawrence Chen opened one of his banker's boxes, pulling out documentation. I've completed a preliminary audit of Apex Holdings' Chicago properties. Grandview Towers isn't an isolated incident. He distributed folders around the table. 17 properties across the Chicago metro area. Similar patterns at 12 of them. Combined evictions over 2 years. 147 long-time tenants. Demographic analysis shows statistically impossible coincidence. Margaret pulled up another screen. Federal Fair Housing Act violations carry penalties of $16,000 to $65,000 per incident for first-time violators. Pattern and practice violations can reach $150,000 per incident, plus punitive damages. She let that sink in. 47. Evictions times conservative. 75,000 average penalty equals $11,225 million in potential federal liability. That's before civil lawsuits from displaced tenants, which our legal team estimates at an additional $8 to $12 million. Russell's lawyer was no longer taking notes. She was calculating exposure, and the numbers were devastating. Additionally, Chicago's Fair Housing Ordinance allows for treble damages in discrimination cases. The city's Corporation Council has already contacted me about a potential investigation. Howard Sterling stood abruptly. I need to make a phone call. Sit down, Councilman. Margaret's voice carried steel. You'll have plenty of time for damage control after this meeting. Right now, you're going to listen. Surprisingly, he sat, Margaret continued. Meridian Capital Group's reputation is also at stake. As a major institutional investor, any discrimination findings could trigger SEC disclosure requirements, impact other portfolio holdings, and damage relationships with pension funds and university endowments who have ethical investment mandates. Lawrence Chen nodded grimly. Our legal team confirms this exposure. The board is extremely concerned, which brings us to individual accountability. Margaret's screen changed to organizational charts. Russell Hendricks, as regional director, approved all 17 evictions at Grandview Towers and similar actions at other properties. Derek Walsh executed those evictions with documented verbal harassment and destruction of property. Sandra Pierce processed paperwork she knew contained false justifications. She paused, looking at each person. Jake Brennan followed orders, but showed willingness to change. That matters. Jake straightened slightly in his chair. Here's what happens next, Margaret said. Russell, Meridian Capital is terminating your employment and all severance packages. You'll face potential personal liability in civil lawsuits from displaced tenants. I'm recommending criminal referral to the Department of Justice for conspiracy to violate civil rights, under Title 42, Section 3631. Russell's face went white. You can't prove intent. Your internal emails can. Lawrence Chen pulled out another folder, discussing clearing out undesirable demographics and optimizing tenant quality. Your words, Russell. Discoverable, damaging, potentially criminal. Jennifer Morrison leaned toward Russell, whispering urgently. He slumped in his chair. Sandra Pierce, Margaret continued. You're suspended without pay for 90 days. During that time, you'll complete comprehensive fair housing training and work with a tenant advocacy group. If you successfully complete the program, you can return to a different property under strict supervision. If you fail or refuse, termination with cause. Sandra nodded mutely, tears forming in her eyes. Jake Brennan, you receive a formal written reprimand and mandatory bias training, but you keep your position. Your conduct after the reveal showed capacity for growth. Thank you, Mom, Jake said quietly. Veronica Whitmore, as HOA president, you don't work for Apex, so I can't fire you. However, I'm now the majority owner of units in Grandview Towers. I purchased 17 units at market rate yesterday, giving me controlling interest in HOA votes. I'm calling for your immediate removal and election of new leadership committed to inclusive policies. Veronica's attorney started to object, but Veronica stopped her with a hand gesture. I'll resign, she said stiffly, effective immediately. Wise choice, Margaret acknowledged. Margaret pulled up her final slide, comprehensive reform requirements. Within 30 days, Meridian Capital will implement these non-negotiable changes across all properties. 1. Independent fair housing audit of all evictions in the past 3 years. 2. Tenant Bill of Rights posted prominently in every building, available in multiple languages. 3. Anonymous complaint system with direct reporting to external oversight board. 4. Mandatory quarterly. Bias training for all property management staff. 5. Tenant advisory councils with binding input on policy changes. 6. Affordable housing commitment, minimum. 25% of units reserved for tenants earning below area median income. Lawrence Chen was nodding. The board has already approved these measures in principle. We're prepared to move forward. Good, because if Meridian doesn't comply, TechVision Solutions will divest our entire $127 million stake in your fund and publicly state why. That kind of institutional investor action tends to trigger cascading divestment. Lawrence smiled wryly. Understood. We'll comply. Margaret turned to Howard Sterling. Councilman, you have a choice. Champion fair housing legislation with real enforcement mechanisms, or I provide Emily's full live stream footage to your primary opponent. Chicago voters tend to dislike politicians who threaten elderly women's families. Howard's jaw tightened. I'll introduce a comprehensive tenant protection ordinance next council session. Excellent. I'll be watching closely. Margaret closed her laptop. My mother is recovering at home. She'll be moving back into Grandview Towers next month. Same apartment, fully renovated, rent-free for 1 year, as compensation. Every other displaced tenant receives the same offer or equivalent financial settlement. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. Gentlemen, ladies, you came here thinking this was negotiation. It wasn't. This was notification of what's already happening. Change begins today, whether you embrace it or resist it. But it's happening. As they filed out, Lawrence Chen lingered. Margaret, what you did here today, this could transform how property management works industry-wide. That's the idea, Margaret replied. My mother shouldn't have to be related to a CEO to receive basic human dignity. Nobody should. Outside the conference room windows, Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon, vast, powerful, inevitable, just like the change Margaret Chen had set in motion. February 1st, 2024. 10 days after the eviction. Grandview Towers. Community room, formerly used exclusively for HOA board meetings and wine tastings, now hosted its first all-resident town hall. Every chair was filled. Standing room only lined the walls. Margaret stood at the front alongside the newly appointed interim building manager. Patricia Okafor, a Nigerian-American woman with 15 years of property management experience and zero tolerance for discrimination. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her accent carrying the musical quality of Lagos mixed with Chicago's South Side. "Today, we're introducing immediate operational changes affecting everyone in this building." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some residents looked curious. Others, particularly those who'd filmed Dorothy's eviction, looked nervous. Margaret stepped forward. "First, I want to clarify my role. I now own 18 units in this building, making me the majority stakeholder in HOA decisions. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to ensure what happened to my mother never happens to anyone else." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her displayed the new Grandview Towers Resident Bill of Rights, a comprehensive document drafted by housing attorneys and tenant advocacy groups. Every resident, regardless of income, race, religion, or family status, has the following guaranteed rights: right to 90-day notice before any lease non-renewal, with written justification; right to appeal any violation notice to an independent review board; right to reasonable accommodations for disabilities, family size, and cultural practices; right to organize tenant associations without retaliation; right to access complaint; procedures in multiple languages. Timothy Grayson, one of the former HOA board members, raised his hand hesitantly. "What about property values? If standards drop, property values," Margaret said carefully, "are maintained through good management, not through exclusion. Quality of life improves when communities are stable, diverse, and equitable. The data supports this conclusively." Patricia added, "Under previous management, turnover was 23% annually. High turnover decreases property values. Our goal is stable, long-term tenancy for everyone." An elderly white woman in the third row stood up. Margaret recognized her, Mrs. Catherine Brenner, who'd lived in the building since 1998 but had stayed silent during Dorothy's eviction. "I need to say something." Catherine's voice shook slightly. "I watched what happened to Mrs. Chen. I didn't help. I was afraid if I spoke up, I'd be targeted next. I'm ashamed of that." The room went quiet. "This building used to feel like a community," Catherine continued. "Somewhere along the way we forgot that. I want to be part of making it right." Scattered applause started, then grew. Not everyone joined. Some residents sat with arms crossed, but momentum was building. The following Monday, mandatory bias training began. Patricia had hired Dr. James Chen, again, no relation, a renowned expert in fair housing compliance who'd worked with HUD on national training programs. His approach combined legal requirements with psychological research on implicit bias. Jake Brennan sat in the front row of the community room, notebook open. Beside him sat the rest of Grandview's security team, maintenance staff, and leasing office workers. 23 people total. "Let's start with a scenario," Dr. Chen said. "A resident complains about cooking smells from a neighbor's apartment. How do you respond?" One security guard, new hire Marcus Williams, raised his hand. "Investigate the complaint. Check if there's a lease violation." "Common response," Dr. Chen acknowledged. "But let's dig deeper. What assumptions are you making about the complaint?" The training continued for 4 hours, covering everything from microaggressions to systemic discrimination patterns. They analyzed actual eviction cases, including Dorothy's, breaking down each decision point where bias influenced outcomes. Jake found himself confronting uncomfortable truths about his own conduct. During the lunch break, he approached Patricia privately. "I need to apologize formally to Mrs. Chen," he said. "And to Margaret. What I did, following orders, isn't an excuse. Write it down," Patricia advised. "A real apology, specific about what you did wrong and what you're doing differently. Mrs. Chen deserves more than verbal words." Jake nodded, already drafting the letter in his mind. Meanwhile, Sandra Pierce was completing her suspension requirements. She'd spent the past week volunteering at Chicago Housing Authority, helping displaced families navigate the rental application process. The experience had been humbling, I processed those eviction papers like they were just forms, she told her supervisor at CHA. I never thought about the actual people losing their homes, families with nowhere to go. And now, her supervisor asked, now I'll never sign another eviction notice without verifying every detail myself. And if something feels wrong, I'll say something. I should have said something. February 15th, 2024. Grandview Towers received a complete technology overhaul funded by Meridian Capital's compliance budget. The changes were comprehensive and designed to prevent future abuses. New tenant portal system. Every resident received login credentials to a secure platform where they could submit maintenance requests, track complaint status, view community announcements, and most importantly, access the anonymous reporting system. The anonymous hotline connected directly to an external oversight board consisting of 3 housing attorneys, 2 tenant advocates and 1 civil rights expert. No complaint could be buried or ignored by building management. Digital documentation requirements. Every interaction between staff and residents now required digital logging. Security contacts, maintenance visits, complaint investigations, all documented with timestamps and notes. The system flagged patterns that might indicate bias or harassment. Language access. The tenant portal offered full functionality in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Polish, Arabic, and Tagalog, the 6 most common languages among Grandview residents. All official notices went out in multiple languages automatically. Patricia demonstrated the new system during a second town hall. If you have a concern about anything, discrimination, safety, maintenance, staff conduct, you can report it here. She pulled up the anonymous reporting form. The system generates a tracking number. You'll receive updates every 48 hours until resolution. What if management retaliates? Someone asked. The oversight board monitors for retaliation patterns. Any staff member found retaliating faces immediate termination. That's now in all employee contracts. Mrs. Okonkwo, the 71-year-old Nigerian woman previously evicted for cooking odors, attended this meeting via video call from her new apartment across town. Margaret had personally contacted her about returning to Grandview. Will it really be different? Mrs. Okonkwo asked. I loved my home there, but I'm afraid. I understand that fear, Margaret replied. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise accountability. If anyone harasses you for cooking traditional meals, they'll face consequences, not you. Mrs. Okonkwo nodded slowly. I'll think about it. 3 other previously evicted families were having similar conversations. Trust, once broken, required patient rebuilding. February 20th, 2024. The Chicago Tribune published a front-page feature. Tech CEO transforms building that evicted her mother, a case study in accountability. Amanda Walsh's investigative piece detailed everything: the original eviction, the viral video, Margaret's intervention, and now the comprehensive reforms. The article included interviews with residents, housing experts, and even a grudging comment from Russell Hendricks's attorney. But more importantly, it included the full text of Grandview Towers' new policies, which other buildings across Chicago were already copying. What Margaret Chen did isn't just justice for one family, housing advocate Monica Rivera told the Tribune. It's a blueprint for how institutional power can be redirected toward equity instead of exclusion. The article went viral. Within 24 hours, property management companies across the country were fielding questions from investors and tenants about their own policies. Meridian Capital issued a public statement. We are implementing the Grandview model across all 127 properties in our residential portfolio. Fair housing isn't just legal compliance, it's our ethical foundation. Lawrence Chen appeared on CNBC to discuss the business case for equitable housing. Discrimination is expensive, he told the anchor. Legal liability, high turnover, reputational damage, the costs are enormous. Doing the right thing is also the smart thing financially. Meanwhile, City Councilman Howard Sterling, true to his pressured promise, introduced the Tenant Protection and Fair Housing Enforcement Act to Chicago's City Council. The proposed ordinance included Mandatory bias, training for all property management staff, independent oversight for evictions of tenants over age. 60 treble damages for discrimination. Violations public database of building-level eviction. Rates political observers noted that Sterling's sudden passion for tenant rights coincided perfectly with his upcoming re-election campaign. Regardless of motive, the policy would help thousands of vulnerable renters. March 1st, 2024. Dorothy Chen stood in the doorway of apartment 12C, her original home, now completely renovated. Fresh paint, new appliances, professionally cleaned carpets. Her furniture, what had been salvageable from that rainy morning, had been carefully restored and arranged exactly as she'd had it on. The kitchen counter sat a welcome basket from the new Grandview Towers Community Committee, formed by residents who wanted to actively build inclusivity. Inside, homemade cookies from Catherine Brenner, a plant from the Martinez family in 7D, coffee from the Ethiopian shop owned by a resident's brother, and a card signed by 41 residents. Welcome home, Mrs. Chen, we're glad you're back. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different tears. Jake Brennan knocked softly on the open door. Mrs. Chen, I have something for you. He handed her an envelope, his formal apology letter. 3 pages of specific acknowledgement of his failures and concrete commitments to do better. I don't expect forgiveness, Jake said quietly. I just need you to know I'm sorry, and I'm working every day to be better. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you for saying this. It matters. Down the hall, Mrs. Okonkwo was moving back into her old apartment. The smell of jollof rice, the traditional Nigerian dish that had sparked complaints, drifted through the hallway. This time, instead of complaints, neighbor Elena Rodriguez knocked on her door. That smells amazing. Would you be willing to share your recipe? Cultural exchange replaced cultural exclusion. The following Tuesday, Grandview Towers hosted its first community dinner, a potluck where residents brought dishes from their heritage. The community room overflowed with Polish pierogi, Mexican tamales, Korean bulgogi, Italian pasta, Ethiopian injera, and Dorothy's Chinese dumplings. Children of different backgrounds played together. Adults who'd never spoken before discovered shared interests. Emily, the college student who'd live-streamed the original Eviction, attended with her social work classmates, documenting the transformation for her thesis project. This is what a community should look like, she told her camera. Diverse, welcoming, real. Margaret stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her mother laugh with neighbors who'd once stood silent during her humiliation. Patricia Okafor approached with a glass of wine. You did good work here, Patricia said. We did good work, Margaret corrected. And we're not done. This is just the beginning. Outside, the Grandview Towers sign had been updated with a new tagline beneath the building name. A community that belongs to everyone. April 2024. Emily's original livestream, now titled Justice for Mrs. Chen, had reached 3.7 million views across platforms. But it was no longer just a viral moment. It had become a catalyst. 6 Minutes aired a 14-minute segment featuring Margaret and Dorothy, documenting the transformation from eviction to equity. Correspondent Sharon Alfonsi walked through Grandview Towers, interviewing residents who'd witnessed both the cruelty and the redemption. This isn't just one building's story, Alfonsi told viewers. It's a window into systematic problems plaguing rental housing nationwide, and proof that accountability can create real change. The segment included damning statistics. In major U.S. cities, elderly renters of color faced eviction at rates 340% higher than white counterparts. Property management companies routinely used coded language, cultural incompatibility, lifestyle differences, community standards, to mask discriminatory intent. Margaret sat across from Alfonsi in the renovated community room. My mother had resources. She had me, she had my company's legal team, she had a platform. But what about the thousands of elderly people facing the same discrimination who don't have those advantages? That's who we're really fighting for. The broadcast triggered immediate responses. Congressional representatives from both parties requested briefings on fair housing enforcement. HUD Secretary Martinez announced a new task force investigating systematic eviction practices. NPR's All Things Considered devoted an entire week to housing discrimination, using Grandview Towers as the central case study. Podcast downloads exceeded 2 million. The companion website included a Know Your Rights toolkit downloaded 340,000 times in the first month. The Washington Post published an op-ed by Margaret titled, "When My Mother's Eviction Became a Business Decision." Within hours, it became the most shared article of the week. "We've created a system where corporations profit from displacement," Margaret wrote, "where optimizing portfolios means destroying communities, where quarterly earnings matter more than human dignity. But systems built by humans can be changed by humans if we have the courage to demand better." International outlets picked up the story. The BBC, Al Jazeera, and Deutsche Welle all featured segments on American housing inequality, using Dorothy's story as illustration. Global audiences watched the live-stream footage, shocked by what happened in wealthy Chicago. May 2024, the National Apartment Association held its annual convention in Las Vegas. Margaret Chen was the surprise keynote speaker, the first non-industry person to address the conference in its 87-year history. Standing before 4,200 property managers, investors, and developers, Margaret didn't soften her message. "Raise your hand if you've implemented eviction quotas to optimize occupancy," she began. Uncomfortable silence filled the ballroom. Finally, scattered hands rose, then more. Eventually, roughly 40% of attendees had hands raised. "Thank you for your honesty. Now keep your hands up if you track the demographics of those evictions." Most hands dropped immediately. That's the problem. You're making decisions that disproportionately impact vulnerable populations, but you're not tracking whether those decisions are discriminatory. Ignorance isn't protection, it's liability. She presented the Grandview model in detail, the technology systems, the oversight mechanisms, the training protocols, the tenant bill of rights. Our data showed that 6 months after implementation, Grandview's occupancy had increased to 97%. Maintenance requests were resolved 40% faster, and resident satisfaction scores had jumped from 3.2 to 4.7 out of 5. "This isn't charity," Margaret emphasized. "It's good business. Stable tenancy reduces costs. Happy residents take care of properties. Ethical practices reduce legal liability. The business case for equity is overwhelming." During Q&A, a property manager from Atlanta stood. "Ms. Chen, your company has resources most of us don't. How can smaller operators implement these changes?" Margaret smiled. TechVision Solutions is open sourcing our tenant management platform, free for any residential property under 200 units. We're also funding training scholarships for 500 property managers annually. Resources aren't the barrier, will is. By convention's end, 73 property management companies had signed commitments to adopt modified versions of the Grandview model. The National Apartment Association created a Fair Housing Excellence certification program using Margaret's protocols as the standard. 3 major real estate investment trusts, controlling 380,000 residential units combined, announced comprehensive policy reviews. When CEO told the Wall Street Journal the Chen case was a wake-up call. "We either lead on equity or face the consequences." Smaller landlords formed a cooperative network to share bias training resources and oversight systems. What had seemed impossible, industry-wide cultural transformation, was actually happening. Fall 2024. Harvard Business School added the Grandview Towers case to its required MBA curriculum. Professor Rachel Morrison designed the module to explore business ethics, stakeholder capitalism, and the power of strategic accountability. Students watched Emily's live stream in class, then analyzed Margaret's response through multiple business frameworks. The case study posed challenging questions. When does shareholder power obligate intervention in subsidiary operations? How do you balance fiduciary responsibility with moral responsibility? What's the business case for equity versus the ethical case? At Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, just blocks from Grandview Towers, Dorothy Chen guest lectured in a corporate social responsibility course. Students sat transfixed as she described the emotional devastation of losing her home, then the redemption of community transformation. My daughter had power, but she chose to use it for more than just my benefit, Dorothy told the class. She could have solved my problem privately. Instead, she fixed the system that created the problem. Law schools incorporated the case into housing discrimination courses. Yale, Columbia, and Stanford all featured the legal analysis, how Margaret leveraged shareholder authority, corporate governance, and public pressure to force systemic change. Professor David Leung at UC Berkeley Law noted, "The Chen strategy is remarkable because it worked through power structures rather than against them. She didn't ask permission to create change. She used her legitimate authority to demand it." High schools in Chicago's public system developed a simplified version for civics classes. Students learned about fair housing laws, tenant rights, and the power of documentation through Dorothy's story. Journalism schools used Emily's live stream to teach citizen journalism ethics and the responsibility that comes with viral content. Emily herself, now graduated, spoke at several schools about her experience. "I just hit go live that morning," she told journalism students at Columbia. "I had no idea it would reach millions. But documentation matters. Bearing witness matters. Sometimes your phone camera is the most powerful tool for accountability." November 2024, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development released comprehensive new guidance on eviction practices, directly citing the Grandview Towers case. The directive required all properties receiving federal housing subsidies to implement demographic tracking of eviction patterns independent, review of evictions involving elderly or disabled tenants mandatory, bias training for property, staff anonymous tenant complaint systems, SHUD. Secretary Martinez announced $50 million in grants for jurisdictions implementing Grandview-style oversight programs. 15 cities applied in the first month. Chicago's City Council passed the Tenant Protection Act by 42-8 vote. Councilman Howard Sterling, despite his original opposition, stood at the signing ceremony beside Mayor Brandon Johnson. "This legislation represents a fundamental shift," Sterling said, sounding almost sincere. "Housing isn't just real estate, it's human rights." Political observers noted Sterling's poll numbers had improved significantly after championing the bill. Cynical, perhaps, but effective. The Illinois state legislature followed with statewide protections. Other states began drafting similar measures. California, New York, Massachusetts, Washington, and Oregon all introduced bills modeled on Chicago's ordinance. At the federal level, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Maxine Waters co-sponsored the Fair Housing Enforcement Act, which would strengthen HUD's investigative authority and increase penalties for systematic discrimination. "The Chen case showed us what individual courage can accomplish," Warren said during a Senate hearing. "Now we need to institutionalize that accountability through federal law." Margaret testified at that hearing alongside housing advocates and formerly displaced tenants from around the country. Her testimony focused on making systemic change accessible to people without resources. "Not every family has a CEO daughter," Margaret told the committee. "But every family deserves the protection that comes from strong, fair housing enforcement. That requires federal leadership, adequate funding, and real consequences for violations." The bill gained bipartisan co-sponsors after amendments addressing small landlord concerns. Political analysts predicted passage within the next congressional session. December 2024. Sociologists at the University of Chicago published a research paper, "From Eviction to Equity, Measuring Community Transformation at Grandview Towers." The study tracked measurable outcomes over 11 months. Tenant stability, 97% occupancy, compared to 71% industry average cross-cultural interaction, 340% increase in inter-ethnic friendships, community engagement, 68% of residents now participated in building activities, up from 12% maintenance efficiency, 40% faster response times, resident satisfaction, 4.8 out of 5, placing Grandview in the top 2% nationally property values, increased 11%, outperforming neighborhood average, but the researchers also documented intangible changes. Weekly community dinners continued, now organized by residents themselves. A tutoring program connected college student residents with children in the building. Language exchange groups formed organically, Spanish speakers teaching English speakers and vice versa. What we're observing goes beyond policy compliance, lead researcher Dr. Sarah Kim noted. This is genuine community formation across difference, something increasingly rare in segregated America. The study identified a dignity multiplier effect. When people feel respected and protected, they invest more in community well-being. Acts of consideration multiplied. Residents helping elderly neighbors with groceries, watching each other's children, sharing cultural celebrations. Dorothy Chen's apartment became an informal gathering place. Every Sunday afternoon, neighbors dropped by for tea and conversation. Her kitchen, once cited as producing offensive ethnic odors, now served as the building's cultural center. Mrs. Okonkwo taught Nigerian cooking classes. Elena Rodriguez organized a building-wide Dia de los Muertos celebration. The Martinez family hosted a Christmas posada. The Pattersons, previously evicted for excessive noise, returned, and their children's laughter, now mixed with multilingual conversations in the courtyard. Catherine Brenner, the 76-year-old who'd apologized for her silence, became an advocate for elderly tenant rights. She testified at city council hearings, wrote letters to representatives, and mentored other seniors facing housing instability. Grandview taught me something important, Catherine said in an interview with Chicago Magazine. Silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. When you see injustice and say nothing, you're choosing a side. I'll never make that mistake again. Jake Brennan completed his bias training and was promoted to head of security for 3 Meridian Capital properties. He implemented Grandview-style protocols at each location, using his experience to train other security professionals. I tell them about that morning, Jake said. How I was so sure I was right, so certain I was just doing my job. How wrong I was. Your certainty is often your biggest blind spot. The transformation at Grandview Towers proved something crucial. Change is possible, but it requires more than good intentions. It requires accountability, resources, and people willing to use their power for something beyond profit. One building had changed, but the ripples were spreading far beyond Grandview's walls. January 22, 2025, exactly 1 year after the eviction. Margaret Chen stood in Grandview Tower's community room, the same space where her mother had sat crying on the floor. Today, banners in 6 languages proclaimed 1 year of community, 1 year of change. Dorothy sat surrounded by neighbors who'd become genuine friends. Her blood pressure had stabilized. Neighbors checked on her daily, helped with groceries, accompanied her to medical appointments. Mom, they want you to cut the cake, Margaret said. Dorothy stood and addressed the crowd of 52 residents. 1 year ago, I thought my life was over. I lost my home, lost my dignity, but my daughter changed what belonging means here. Now we all belong. Patricia Okafor presented the annual report. 0 evictions in 12 months. 0 discrimination complaints. 98% occupancy, highest in building history. Resident turnover, 3%, compared to 23% industry average. These numbers represent Mrs. Chen cooking her traditional meals without fear. The Patterson children playing without complaints. This is what a community looks like. Later that evening, Amanda Walsh conducted a final interview in Dorothy's apartment. Looking back, what stands out most? Amanda asked. How close we came to a different outcome, Margaret said. If I hadn't been a CEO with resources, my mother would have been just another statistic. The injustice would have stood. That's exactly the problem. Justice shouldn't depend on being related to someone with power. Every elderly tenant deserves protection. The system should provide that automatically. Dorothy emerged with tea. My daughter thinks too much about systems. Sometimes it's simpler. People need to remember other people are human. All the policies exist to enforce one basic principle: treat people with dignity, Margaret said. If we did that naturally, we wouldn't need elaborate systems. But we do need them, Amanda observed. We do, because power corrupts, because profit drives exploitation. Good systems protect us from our worst impulses. The Dorothy Chen Foundation launched in October 2024 with $15 million in funding. Programs included emergency legal assistance, serving 847 families in 3 months. Rental subsidies for 341 fixed-income elderly residents. Education workshops attended by 1,200 property managers. The Grandview Model Training Institute opened in September, with Patricia Okafor as executive director, spreading best practices nationwide. The open-source tenant platform launched in August. Within 5 months, 2,300 properties adopted the system, giving 340,000 tenants access to transparent reporting. Margaret quietly purchased 12 more Chicago properties, modest apartments in working-class neighborhoods. Each operated under Grandview model principles. I'm a tech CEO who happens to own some apartments, Margaret told Forbes. But every property I control proves that ethical housing is profitable housing. Margaret looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, you have power. Here's how to use it. Tenants, know your rights. Document everything. If you witness discrimination against a neighbor, speak up. Landlords, implement transparency systems. Track your decisions for bias patterns. Your tenants are people whose lives you impact daily. Investors, ask questions about your portfolio properties. How do they handle evictions? Your capital creates incentives. Align them with human dignity. Neighbors, don't film injustice for entertainment. When you witness it, document and intervene. Policymakers, support strong, fair housing enforcement. Fund oversight agencies. Create real penalties. Everyone, share this story because awareness creates pressure for change. Tag your representatives. Send it to your property management company. Margaret paused. My mother is one person, but millions face the same threats. We can't rescue them all individually. We have to change the system. That requires all of us. Margaret stepped into Grandview's courtyard. Children played multilingual games. Adults clustered in conversation groups, mixing languages and generations. Mrs. Okonkwo taught cooking techniques. The Patterson children organized a talent show. Dorothy joined her daughter, wrapping a shawl against the January chill. You did good work, Maymay. We're not done. 12 buildings in Chicago. What about thousands of others where this is still happening? So you keep going. But also see what you've built. Dorothy gestured at the courtyard. Look at this. Really look. Margaret saw Jake Brennan helping an elderly resident with groceries. Emily interviewing children. Patricia Okafor hugging Mrs. Rodriguez, both laughing. She saw the community. Real, functioning, equitable community. The work continues. But you're right. This matters. What you proved, Dorothy said gently, is that love is stronger than profit. Family is stronger than policy. Dignity is stronger than power. That's poetic, Mom, but we also needed corporate leverage, legal expertise, media pressure, and technology. That, too, Dorothy laughed. But it started with love. With you refusing to let them treat your mother like trash. They stood together, mother and daughter, watching the community they'd fought to preserve. 1 year ago, Dorothy Chen sat on a lobby floor, humiliated and powerless. Today, she stood in her home, surrounded by community. Proof that justice is possible when courage meets resources, meets persistence. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished, but it was happening, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.